about read news, because read news is those things that the current generation has no idea about, right? But everything that you see happening today happened to us back in the 90s, right?
This is true. I don't know how close we want to go to politics, but we don't do politics in the show, but we can come right up to the line and stop there.
No politics, but read news as like Reddit, right? So Reddit is just like, and we banned read news back in the 90s because of all the crazy things that people would post on read news, right? And there was a lot of issues, and today you see the same thing, right? So it's like the cycle of technology, 30 years, right?
Cycle of technology or the cycle of humanity rediscovering the same problems again and again. I actually started recording, but I'm going to do
that's cool. That's all right.
We're going to keep talking, but I'll do one thing. Yep. Jacob, welcome to the show. So happy to have you on today.
Thank you, Ari. Glad to be here. Very glad to be here.
So we started to talk about something completely unrelated to software. We'll probably get back. We'll probably get back to that. But this is a really interesting topic, right? This kind of humanity cycle of things that every generation seems to be making the same mistakes again and again. So tell us kind of for our younger audience that has no idea what was happening in the 90s. Tell us that story from your perspective.
From the beginning. So, my first experience was getting on the internet at WPI when I was a first-year student there in 1990, right? I had no idea the internet existed because I came from the world of a trailer park in Hot Springs, South Dakota, right? I had no experience with that. So I'm on using IRC, Internet Relay Chat, right? And these little chat rooms, when we're talking and stuff and talking about like the lyrics for social tendencies and stuff, we were just having a really good social experience, right? There was no politics. There was nothing. It's just like, hey, this is really cool, right? And then I discovered like Read News, for instance, right? Read News it's really neat because you could find stuff to buy. Right. So I used to play Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games a lot. Right. So you could go and find all these weird esoteric books. Yeah, right on. See? Exactly. Right. We got to go find those books sometimes. Right. Because you couldn't just go to Amazon. Right. So we had alt.for sale, RPG, alt.for sale, this and that. Right. So you go to Read News to find these. And they were always doing auctions. Right. So you have to like bid on stuff, and there's always, that's where, the idea of flaming came out, right? So back in like 1990,
we invented flaming. I just want everybody listening to us to know.
Yes.
IRC, what was that? Mirabilis? I can't remember. Was that the company's name? Like they went from nothing to being, I don't know if it was $1 billion, but it was the first kind of internet bubble up and down, and they had disappeared with Skype and other things that no longer exist. And we invented trolling and flaming and all the things. That's where it started.
And it came from Read News, right? Because people would get on Read News and just like come at you. They call it flaming. They would just post stuff on you. You're this, you're that. They would attack you personally. You're like, I'm just looking for the latest Dungeon Master's guide, man. What are you talking about, fool? Right? Right? And you see that happening today, right? And it's like all these little trolls, you call them trolls and stuff, right? They just come out of nowhere to, I guess, the same reasons why they did it back in the 90s, right? I guess people are bored sometimes, and listless and angry sometimes and frustrated, and they just want to like vent. I'm okay with venting. You can vent. I'm okay. You can call me up and vent if you want to. I'm cool, right? Just don't make it personal, right?
What is it like? This is every generation, right? This is not going away. It just seems to change form. In fact, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a social media now platform that has capitalized basically on flaming, trolling, and basically negativity bias. Yeah, it's like their thing. Like it's the only thing happening on the network. I wish I remembered the name.
Oh my gosh, that's wild.
It's deeply human, right? There's deep human psychology where we want to.
It's catharsis, right? You gotta just get it out. Get it out. And then I'm done. I'm cool. Then what I found, I actually met some people that would flame me, right? And I actually flamed some people too, because I was young, stupid, all those things, right?
I've been there, right? Done that.
Right. I got to meet these people. I'm like, you know what? They're actually pretty cool once they got past the angst and the catharsis, right? Like, hey, you're a pretty cool guy. It's all right. I'm sorry too. We shake hands. We're okay, right? All right. But
it's funny, like the things online, and then when you're face to face, like people don't behave like that face to face, right?
Yeah, they don't exactly. Not unless they want to do a fist fight, right?
That's fair.
That's the thing, right? That does happen.
Yeah,
but,
that's fair.
mostly we're cordial, right?
I will say that the people in D&D, right, chat rooms are not the type, and this is self-deprecating too, because they're usually not the type to get into fistfights. So I'd say we're usually pretty safe there, although there's a few, right?
Right, but they always avoid it, right? They always try to avoid that, right?
We're not that type of people.
Yeah, exactly.
We're very brave behind an IRCQ channel.
Right.
Yeah, that's where we thrive.
Yeah, exactly. ICQ. I remember ICQ. I don't know if you ever used that, Ari, but ICQ
I did.
Also, right?
I did.
That was cool too, right?
I did.
That was one of those really neat platforms that came out of Israel, right?
Yeah,
it was really neat, right? It was very secure. One of the first ones, that actually paid attention to security.
Yeah, because we didn't know back in the day. We didn't know about predators, and we didn't know about all the bad things that can happen on.
Right.
We weren't ready for that yet, so we were discovering it.
Yeah.
So there's some horror stories about that time as well, and unfortunately, they're ripe today, especially on what is it, Snapchat and stuff like that. It's just horrifying.
Right. It is right. Yeah.
So talking about horror stories. Okay. So pick a horror story from any area or topic, and let's talk through it.
Oh man, horror stories. So let's talk about NFL Game Tracker. Right. This was a lot of fun. So back in the day in 1999, I was at Praja, which was a startup. Right. This is my 4th year there. Before that, I was at Los Alamos and BBN, right, doing government work and stuff like that, right? So, Terry Hicks lands this gig with Fox, right? Terry Hicks, he went on to be the CEO of Intuit, right? Super big wig, really smart guy, but he was just a marketing guy working with us, right? And he landed this gig with Fox to do NFL Game Tracker. And they needed a project lead, so there's me. I knew Java really well. I had been working with Java since, SunOS 4.1.4, right, when they released it as an alpha version over at Los Alamos. So I've been doing it for a while. So for the folks that are listening and watching that have never experienced that level of a project, it is a crucible. It really is, because the minute it starts, we get on a plane, we fly all the way to New York, right? We have to talk to Jordan Kurzweil, right? That's Ray Kurzweil's son. You know who Ray is, right? He's like superstar Ray. Well, he has kids, and I met one of them. We talked for a long time, right? And he's got these great ideas. We want to do this, we want to do this, or this, and you're like, you don't want to make Jordan upset, right? I just naturally want to make him happy. I don't know why. He's a really cool guy, right? So I'm like, but then he's got people that work for him, right? And there's this guy, right? This guy, Mr. Hammer. I'm going to say his first name. But he went on to be a producer on Lost. But anyway, this guy, he's so stressed. He's like chain smoking all the time. Every time I would go outside, there he is down on the street smoking. I'm like, dude, what's going on? It's like, it's so hard because the pace is just rigor and rigor and rigor, right? And so it was NFL Game Tracker was pretty much 20 hours a day continuously, right? And we were just running constantly tests and test cases and QA. We had issues with Java because Java was back at that time, even today still, but back in the time it was a lot worse. It was very difficult with memory. It didn't manage memory very well, right? And people weren't that experienced with it, right? So we have an eclectic group of skills, right, in our project group, and I pulled myself out of it because I knew I was the project lead, right? So I didn't want to get in the way. And these guys were running. So all I did was run tests every night. So I'm like 3:00 in the morning, I'm like sitting there dreary, running tests, run this test, right? Trying to eat some cold salad, right? And doing this thing, and I would go home for 3 hours and sleep and then wake up and come back. It just is on and on and on. That was unbelievable. But, doing that, when you walk through the crucible, it's actually worth it, right? Because you get out of it and people recognize it. And they're like, you did NFL Game Tracker? Oh, yeah. You get to be part of these like massive multi-billion-dollar enterprises, right? You get to see things that no one will ever see in their entire career, And for these people, it's like every day, right?
Yeah,
like
this is trial by fire is what it is.
It is, right?
Yeah. What was your biggest lesson from, this or any other one of your trial by fires? What is your lesson to, be successful, avoid the pitfalls? What would you advise the young generation who are, up and coming?
Right. on the software side, it's always, test everything, right? From the very beginning, assume that whatever you do is wrong and try to test as rigorously as you can. Because a lot of times we write tests that kind of like test what I think is right, and then they come out to be working, but then to find out later on that that was actually just me trying to create a false positive. Right? Yeah, I don't want to do that. There's that, and manage your time. It's really important, right? Like you got to be able to say no, and you got to manage, how you're going to manage the people around you by time, right? Give people a certain amount of time, give yourself a lot more time because you're going to need that. Because if you run out of time, that's like juice, your energy. Right. And you run out of it, you're done. You're going to be totally useless. And don't be afraid to pull out like I did, because if you're in the way, people will hate you. You don't want to be in the way.
Yeah. Let's go into the kind of human soft side of this. Conflicts arise, pressure is on. Engineers are often incredibly intelligent, often argumentative. How do you navigate those situations?
Yeah. So engineers always come from the same place, and that is they don't want to look stupid, right? That's the number one rule, right? And the second thing is they don't want to fail, because if they fail, they kind of look stupid to themselves. And so you just got to start with that, and remind them that what they're doing is not necessarily wrong. It's just there's a better way to do it.
Let's just capitalize on this for a second, because if you're not that person right now listening, you're not going to get this. Because other people look at these engineers and they're like, oh my God, these are the smartest people I've ever seen. But that's not how they see themselves.
Right.
So this is, I think, an important point to get. Yeah. What does it mean to be, for this engineer sitting in that spot, to not want to look stupid or even stupid to themselves? So give us a feeling for what that means.
Yeah. So when I was at Los Alamos, for instance, right, I'm just 23-year-old kid with a bachelor's degree surrounded by a bunch of guys and a few women who worked with Albert Einstein, John von Neumann, right? PhD guys, right? I'm like, anything I do, it has to be the best, and it has to be right every single time. And it's like this enormous amount of pressure, right? So anytime that someone will come up and question a little bit of like what I'm doing, I'm like, I always felt very insecure because I'm like, like I've got these people and there's me. Like I was really smart. I'm a very talented person, very smart, not because my mom told me, just because I've kind of figured that out eventually. Like, yeah, I'm actually pretty smart, not because anybody told me. And in fact, the opposite when I was a kid, people were definitely not telling me I was smart. But anyway, most engineers are like that, though, Ari. They come out of this social constraints of feeling like they're inadequate, right? Because they're socially awkward. They don't have a lot of friends. They don't have a lot of, relationships, not a lot of romance in their life. And these things tend to build us up as people, as humans, right? These are small little things that build us up, right? Build our fire, and that's our kindling in the fire. And a lot of these guys don't have that. So they get to the job space, right? And the next thing that they have is just their job, right? Their code, their thing, their ideas, whatever they solve with, right? That's their kindling for their fire. And if you take that away from them, man, they get really upset.
Okay, let's explain this for a second. So this was me 20 something, almost 30 years ago. I am basically, only thing in my life is my job, right? What the audience needs to understand is that if you have only one thing in your life and you fail at that, you're failing at everything.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. And that's how we think when we're engineers, when we start out, right? Yeah. Very insecure, very sensitive, and people call us prima donnas and all this kind of hoopla, right? Like, no, it's just because that's all we got, don't take that from me. That's all I got. Right. I had a lot of luck where I got to work on some massive, huge things when I was early on, right? For whatever reason, I got the golden touch, right? Which is great, but not everybody gets that. In fact, almost nobody gets that, right? It's like the 2% get the golden touch, and the rest just have, mediocrity and are told that they're not good enough, and they watch the Silicon Valley guys make billions while, they sit around like, I could have done that, right? Hey, you kill it. You guys are smart. Everybody that's watching, they're all smart guys, right? They're all super smart people, right? Very talented people.
So within this paradigm, I'll finish that story first. I collapsed. I was hospitalized. I was put on an IV, came back, just completely exhausted, dehydrated, not eating well because I was working, 14, 15 hours a day.
Wow.
Come back, my superior officer, this is military. So my commanding officer basically says, look, Ari, you need 3 things in life, right? You need a job, you need a hobby, you need family or a girlfriend, whatever.
Yep.
If anything goes wrong with one of those 3 things, you lean on the other 2. That's how you get stability. So I tell the story to kind of capitalize on that point that a lot of engineers maybe need to learn that lesson and haven't grown that thick skin, and maybe all of their life is kind of wrapped around their intelligence, which is really the point that we're getting at.
Exactly.
Especially if you're a young engineer, right? I'm almost in my, halfway to 50, past the 50 point. We've grown thick skin and we've learned how to manage engineers, but it's not trivial at that early age. So my question to you is, what were the techniques that you have applied and learned to help to guide and grow and kind of mentor these engineers through difficult situations, especially when it's that guy that was me, it was you. What do you do when you're looking at yourself, but 20 years back? What do you do?
Yeah. So I always try to be myself there, right? Like, okay, how would I want to talk to me, right? Aside from sometimes, reaching back in time and give myself a good slap. But, that aside, right? You're like,
this is a very fair comment, by the way.
It's very right, because I always do that. I'm like, man, I wish I would have known me back then. But anyway, that aside, right? You got to just approach them humanly, right? Like, if I were your commanding officer, all right, but like I would say the same thing. We just need to settle down a little bit, and pace ourselves and work on building the fire that makes Ari, smolder. That's what we got to do. Build that fire, and it's not just with one stick. Lots of sticks make the fire, right? And so when the engineers, they start to get stressed out, it's important to make them stop, right? That's the number one thing is when they start, spiraling, you make them stop. And so what we would do at Praja is we would ask them to go play video games, and we would play like Portal, or we would play what was it like? We would play Doom, Network Doom, and all. It's crazy dumb, right? But it's very cathartic, and we would get that stress out, and we would laugh at each other. We would have fun.
There's something else, right? When you need to describe the scenario here is that you're working on solving an incredibly difficult problem,
right?
You don't know how to solve it, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And what happens is you're leveraging. Sorry, I'm putting words into your mouth, but keep me honest here. You're leveraging the back processing of your brain. When you step away from a problem, you kind of relax. Solutions come to you. So not only is this a de-stressing technique, this is also a technique to get past that incredibly high hurdle that you're trying to figure out.
Exactly.
We used to go on bike rides. We used to play Duke Nukem. Until this day, I quote,
Duke Nukem, yes.
You remember this? It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of gum. So all the geeks know that from Duke Nukem. It's actually from an old movie from I think it's the 40s or the 50s. But like this is what we grew up on, right?
Right. Exactly.
These are incredibly important techniques, and I don't always see them with today's engineers, right? Taking the break, back processing, all that stuff.
Yeah, they're not really taught that. A lot of times the investors and the owners of the companies, they don't really come from engineering backgrounds, right? So they have kind of like a whip and a stick, and they forget the carrot, right? And they're just like going at it, like, well, these guys just burn out and walk away, and they leave with nothing.
And we see that a lot. We see high churn rates. We see engineers moving every year, every 2 years. Like, that's ridiculous, right?
Right.
Unless you have a really good manager and culture, and then you see 3 to 10 to 8 to 12 years.
Yeah. Right.
What is the cultural difference that you see between the 2-year churns and the 8 to 10-year churns?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's definitely just the impulse that's imposed on them by their management, right? Having a manager that actually knows how to write software, that understands the technology and has done it, right? Yeah. Versus someone who's just management and administration, right? I mean, those people have a bona fide role. They're just not necessarily going to be managing, like software people. There should always be software people managing software people, or some kind of science or some kind of thing where they have some kind of like applied knowledge, whatever it is, right? It could be even a biologist, as long as they've worked in the lab and understand, like, at 3:00 in the morning when things fail, it's time to just go home and come back the next day, right? Yeah.
I had my sales guys on my engineer's case. I was like, step away from the car. Do not engage with my engineers.
Yeah. Right.
There's something I think fundamental to the idea that software, I don't believe that it's an art, not a science. That I'm not going to say that, but I will say that there is uncertainty in software engineering, and engineers have a personality type very often of certainty. So having the manager be able to translate the uncertainty that engineers don't want to recognize to the rest of the world and say, look, actually there's 5 risks here, and we think it's going to be, between 6 to 8 months. And if this explodes, then it will be 8 months. If it all goes well, maybe it will even be in 5 or 6 months, right? So that kind of communication is kind of foreign to engineers. We love certainty. We love to say what the number is with, with 3 decimal points, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely an art to what you're talking about. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to go to a difficult topic. We'll start from the easy side of it, hiring. How do you, first of all, are all engineers the same? Like, are all engineers basically okay and can all do a good job, or are they horrible engineers that should probably look for a different thing to do, and really, really good ones? What is your vision of the world?
Yeah, Ari. So we've all had friends in college, right? Who come to school in computer science thinking that they want to do computer science, right? And then they wash out because they realize that computer science is a lot harder than it was in high school, right?
Yeah.
Well, some of those kids actually do make it through, right? Barely scrape by, and they end up into the software pool, right? And you're like, well, those are the ones that probably should bubble up into management, okay? Because at least they know, they understand.
Both of us being in management nowadays, the story doesn't make us look good.
It doesn't, I know. But still, those guys, they still understand. They know how to talk to us, right? Because they were our friends, right? They understand some of the things that we like or dislike about our jobs. But then they always had a common thread about them. And that is they were always more interested in the people side of computer science than the computer science side. Always. So and we tend to be not the people, right? We're just like, we like the software. I like solving problems, writing software, and the people just are part of the problem that I have to solve. Okay.
So what happens if that person, right? They're not they don't love it. They're not great at it. They do hardcore coding. What does that look like for the business, for the code base, for the environment?
Well, it can be pretty risky, right? Because they'll oftentimes make, I would say, juvenile mistakes, right? Because they don't have the real experience level that, the rest of us do, right? These tend to be kids that started much later, like in high school. Like I started when I was 11, right? And so, if most of us that were in college at that, we all started early, like 10, 11, 12 years old, But the ones that washed out were the ones that started in high school. And so they do have a certain tendency to, not write the best code. That's not all of them, but that's like, I would say 3 out of 4. They aren't going to rewrite, the kind of code that I would trust firsthand. I would have somebody else look at it too, right? So they're the ones that benefit from pairwise programming. Everybody does, but for them a lot more, right? And so I would always just watch that, as they, get better and they hone their skill, right? Because if they can write code at some point, then they could probably hone that skill much better. Will they be, the next Bill Gates when it comes to writing code? Probably not. But they're going to be the next, what's a good, software manager? Oh, Ari Block. They'll be the next Ari Block, right? Great at managing people.
I'll have you know that I was writing code when I was 8. So playing soccer, I was doing C++. So I'll have you know.
Nice. Nice. But, that's great.
But no, the point is fair that that there is a huge risk of writing. We used to call this back in the day spaghetti code. Now we're calling it anti-patterns, and there's a whole bunch of anti-patterns. Basically, if you see those, you're like, this is risky. So that's what it looks like today. Let's go to the other side. What is the difference between not a bad engineer, maybe not the excellent engineer writing code since they were in diapers, whatever, if that's even a thing. What does the kind of middle ground engineer look like? And how do you know the difference between, this good engineer and a bad engineer? How do you identify that in that short period of time where you're basically hiring? Because what do you have? 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, maybe the technical tests will only be an hour or 2. How do you know, how do you find the real talent as opposed to somebody who's just faking it?
Yeah. That's where jargon comes in, right? So you can usually throw jargon at them pretty fast, and the we'll say bona fide software engineers that are going to stick around are the ones that actually know the jargon, right? And the ones that don't know the jargon are the ones that are going to wash out. That is the sad truth, I think, right? No one likes jargon. I don't like jargon that much. I know no one could talk to me about, patterns and the Gang of Three book, and spout patterns to me like, which visitor pattern, things like that. Like I don't remember a lot of them. It's been a while since I read the book, but if I were interviewing for a job, right, and I would have to go and read that book and make sure that I was up on the lingo and all that jargon so I could talk, right? Because you got to be able to communicate at the same level as your peers, right? And the one thing that humans on a whole don't do well with is not being able to communicate laterally, right? Like I got to be able to communicate the same language with you. You got to understand me. Otherwise we have a block and it's frustrating for both of us. Yeah.
I think that's such a fundamental point, because for me, when I was hiring engineers, I wanted to actually simulate them working through a problem. Mm-hmm. And them solving the problem was part of the test. But a bigger part of the test was me giving the problem with ambiguity and seeing that we could communicate, that they could ask the questions, that I could explain it, that we could find a common language. So I would argue that the ability to find a common language with your engineers while solving a hard problem, that is gold. That is so important. And in essence, that is what you're saying. I just wanted to stress that point.
That's a really good point, Ari. That's a really good way to actually say it too.
Going to the horror show of this, we've unfortunately both had to fire engineers. What does that look like months before? When does the light bulb be like, oh shit, this is not going to work out? What does that look like?
I've never had it where it's been like prolonged like that. I've always known like right away, because there's an implosion event that'll happen, right? And it's usually because there's something in their personal life that's causing them to just give up on working, right? And you can't do anything about it. You could try to save them, but all you're going to do is just sink them more. And so that's when you just have to have that real honest conversation with them and let them know that they're probably going to have to go fix whatever it is that's going on in their personal life. It could be their career-wise personal life as well. Like whatever it is, they got to figure that out, because you can't be the one to be their therapist when it comes to their career or their personal life. Yeah.
And when you come to kind of having that conversation, what are the best practices to do it correctly to your philosophy?
Talk to them like a friend. You got that friend that's having a hard time in their personal life. You don't come at them, right? You talk to them, talk with them, talk them through it, and let them know that you understand, that they're having a struggle, and that struggle has to be handled outside of work. Yeah.
Is there a space where we both know that engineers are, they're not always have the best social interpersonal skills? Is there a space though where the manager can really work with them to get them over those humps? Sure, there's some conflict, but they're great engineers. And I'll give you an example of this. Antisocial engineer, but he gets like 10x more, 5 to 10x more than any other of the engineers. And this is a real situation. I'll tell the story if you want. But what do you do in that situation, right? Excellent engineering, it's not toxic, but it's uncomfortable. Like, what do you do there?
Well, it's important to identify what's causing the antisocial behavior, right? So this is where you do have to tread lightly, right? Because there could be a history of abuse that's causing it. So if you can eliminate that, then it becomes social anxiety for the most part. And then that's just, finding something that they like that you can like too. And then you find this common thread, right? It's kind of like making a friend, right? You make a friend not by, serendipity. Usually, the meet cute doesn't really happen, right? Yeah. But you can make it happen, right? With your employees, with your colleagues, right? With your laterals, right? But just finding that common thread, and sometimes it could be, playing role-playing games. It could be playing video games. It could be, painting, right? I used to paint figurines. That was a lot of fun, right? And some people really like that, and some people, what I've also experienced, Ari, is that there are some people have no idea the things that are available to them, right? And you start to expose them to all these different ideas and things they can do. And they're like, what? And they look at you kind of confused. I had no idea I could do that. I'm like, well, let's break that down and let's go ahead and try that, right?
Yeah.
I'm all for just trying new things for people, like whatever it is, you know.
Yeah. So again, this is really important. When you're dealing with a really tough problem,
Mhm.
the strategy to deal with that is not when you're dealing with the problem. It started months before,
Mhm.
and building that relationship, creating that common grounds, which is really what you're talking about, creating that common language, creating that investment that you are here to invest in that person, help them grow. You believe in them, right? That's what you're talking about. That is what's going to help you get through the crisis.
It is.
So I deeply, deeply appreciate your comment. Building trust with the engineering team, between the engineering team. That's how you're going to get through those white nights of terror, basically.
Yeah.
And what I found, and keep me honest here if you agree, that it's the hard parts that you get through and win together. That's what brings the teams together.
It is, absolutely, right? And that's kind of like, that's the human condition, right? You know, the toughest sales, the meanest storms, that's where you build the biggest bonds, you know? When it's like happy days and sunny out all the time, people are very, I want to say, superficial. But when there's a storm out and it's cold, people aren't superficial anymore. They're very much, engaged with each other through hardship. Yeah.
I would, in looking historically, I would argue that those were some of the most fun times. So, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, NFL Game Tracker was the best time. I learned so much in such a small amount of time, and
even though you were on your knees, basically,
on
right?
my knees. Oh my God, it was the crucible grinder, man. But it was worth it. 100% worth it. And I would do it again and again and again.
I couldn't agree more. Jacob, believe it or not, we are actually way over time, not over time. This has been so much fun. Yeah. I have one question that is scripted, but it's a hard one because it's personal. If you had to go back to 20-something-year-old Jacob, what would you advise him?
I would advise him to have a little more fun, right? Be a little more fun, engage people. People matter. It's not just about writing software. Have some fun.
I love that. People matter. Jacob, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Ari.